very much, Arthur Siddy. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. And is it all going out into Technoland? Oh, Technoland, that sounds like a club, doesn't it? Very, very good to be with you this evening. Yeah, I was very excited about coming to the Cambridge Buddhist Centre because I hadn't been here for quite a long time. I haven't been anywhere for quite a long time, actually. Spent most of the last few years, 2 years at Padmavajra up in South Norfolk, this wonderful retreat centre that I live in. So it's been a real, it's been a road trip, hasn't it? Akasha and Claudio. We've come down. Claudio was particularly keen to come to Cambridge because he's staying with us. He's from Mexico and he's staying with us until next month. He's been 5 months. So he's come from the Sangha in Mexico to be in the Sangha in Norfolk, and he's with the Sangha in Cambridge. So he's experiencing that range of spiritual community that's very, very dear to us in our Triratna Buddhist order. And I've got this rather difficult title, Vowing to Save All Beings. Where you got that from, but Vowing to Save All Beings. That's a belter of a title. It's interesting to look at it because this particular phrase comes from a later Buddhist tradition called the Mahayana, the Great Way, whose sort of spiritual hero and heroine is known as the Bodhisattva, the being for the enlightenment of all beings, who take a great vow, what's known as a pranidhana, very, very strong word in Sanskrit. The vow is more like a sort of force coming into the world, that they are going to not just gain enlightenment, not just follow the Buddha's teaching to attain nirvana, bliss, liberation for themselves, deep peace, getting off the wheel of life, entering into that great, tremendous freedom, which is the essence of the Buddha's teaching. They are going to do that for the benefit of all beings. In fact, they're not going to do it just for the benefit of all beings. They are not even going to enter that nirvana until everybody is liberated, until each and every living being is liberated. Vowing to save all beings. It sounds extraordinary, doesn't it, when you contemplate that? A really kind of extraordinary vision for someone's life. Those of you who know the sevenfold puja will be aware of the last section where you transfer the benefits from performing any Buddhist activity, any spiritual activity, any virtuous activity for the benefit of all beings. And there is a kind of vow, a pranidhana in that, because it says something like, if I can remember it, just as the earth and other elements are serviceable in many ways to the infinite number of beings inhabiting limitless space, so may I become that which maintains all beings situated throughout space, so long as all have not attained to peace. And the peace is, thank you very much, audience participation, proper Sangha. Yes, the peace here is nirvana. So this is a vow to be like the earth and other elements, supporting all sentient beings until they've all entered the great peace of nirvana. It's incredible. I've been very struck by this business of maintaining all beings. For some reason, that's been really, I recite this verse every day at the end of my meditation, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And I'm really pondering it, crikey, that is quite a thing you're saying there, Padmavajra. Do you really mean it? Do you really mean it? What does it mean? Can you really do it? Can you actually do that as an individual? I'll perhaps come to that a bit later on. But that's what you're doing. You're vowing, if you like, to save all beings. But of course, this language of saving is problematic. In fact, deeply problematic. And in a way, it comes into conflict with with the Buddha's own teachings. The Buddha was, as the great Dalit leader who led so many hundreds of thousands of his followers into Buddhism, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he insisted that the Buddha was not, to use the Hindi, moksha datta, not a giver of salvation. Unlike the other founders of world religions, he did not promise salvation. If you believed in him, you will be saved. You will go to heaven. The Buddha insisted that he wasn't that. The Buddha was margadatta. He was the shower of the way. The shower of the way. This is tremendously important. And there's a verse in the Dhammapada. Some of you might be aware of the Dhammapada, very, very popular, very ancient teachings of the Buddha, where the Buddha says, by you must the zealous effort be made. The Buddhas are only showers of the way. By you must the zealous effort be made. The Buddhas are only showers of the way. So this is very important to clarify. You might have the spirit, if you like, the bodhisattva spirit. I want everybody to be saved. And if I could, I would save them. But you know very well that it doesn't work like that. Nobody can be forced into nirvana. Nobody can be saved if they don't want to be saved. I think there must be a scene in the life of Brian, which is about that, you know, about not wanting to be saved. You don't have to be a Buddha if you don't want to be. This is absolutely crucial, I think. First and foremost in Buddhist practice, we have to understand that line, by you must the zealous effort be made. Underlying that is the fundamental Buddhist vision of individual responsibility. You use that word individual in your introduction. You've been emphasizing the importance of individuality. But individuality is used in a rather specialized way in our Triratna. It certainly doesn't mean individualism, which is a version of selfishness. It doesn't mean that. Individuality is pointing to the fact that we are responsible for our lives. So very simple. We are responsible for our satisfaction. We are responsible for our happiness. We are responsible for living meaningfully. We are responsible for our actions. This is absolutely crucial to understand. This is the fundamental Buddhist teaching. You might have heard of this word karma, the law of karma. Well, the law of karma in Buddhist tradition is our actions have consequences. Our intentional actions have consequences for ourselves, have consequences for others. Dhammapada again, first two verses, very, very clear that all of our happiness and suffering proceed from what we do with our minds. Our actions of body, speech, and mind come out of our intention. We make ourselves. We make our world. We create ourselves. We create our world. So if we want to be happy, there are certain things that we need to do for that happiness. If we want to live meaningfully, there's certain things that we need to do to bring that about. Conversely, if we want to avoid suffering and we want to avoid impacting negatively on other people, there are certain things that we need to do. So this brings up the whole area of the area of what the tradition calls skillful and unskillful action. So skillful actions which lead to welfare for ourselves and others, are actions which come out of avoiding craving, hatred, and delusion, and acting out of contentment, loving kindness, and clarity, understanding, wisdom. Suffering and downfall for ourselves and others are going to come out of greed, hatred, and delusion. So very, very simple teaching, but it's absolutely fundamental. And before we can talk about vowing to save beings, we've really got to get hold of this business of personal responsibility. And of course, this comes out of the Buddha's enlightenment. If you like, it's the fundamental insight that comes from the Buddha's enlightenment itself. the Buddha's great realization, which, I mean, it's very hard to talk about the Buddha's realization because it's said to be beyond words. It's a Takavajra. It's beyond the reach of reasoning. It defies any conceptualization. But if you could describe it, and the Buddha does attempt to describe it, he says it's what's known as pratitya samutpada, conditioned co-production. What the Buddha sees, there's no creator God, there's nothing like that, neither is there chance, there's nothing random. What life is a mass of conditions giving rise to further conditions. And individuals create out of the conditions that they set up their own happiness, their own liberation, or their own misery, and their own bondage, their own unfreedom. That's the fundamental Buddhist vision. That's what the Buddha sees. So he has this insight into the fact that we are all individually responsible for our lives, which is liberating, exciting, but also terrifying, because you can't sort of defer. You can't sort of say, I'm miserable because of you. I'm miserable because of them. I'll look at the whole area of conditioning, external conditioning in a minute, but I want to really get it clear in everybody's mind that sooner or later in one's life, one has to take individual responsibility if you want a meaningful life, if you want, in the end, liberation in the Buddhist sense. This is a depiction, actually, of what's known as a pure Buddha field, a pure Buddha land. Actually, it's a vision of enlightenment. It's a vision of the Buddha's enlightenment. It might seem a bit strange for me to say that because there isn't just the Buddha, there's all these beings in it. But it's trying to communicate that the Buddha sees life entirely differently from the way we see life. If there's another image known as the Wheel of Life, which is full of all sorts of different states of suffering and so on, including our own human realm, which is a mixture of suffering and happiness, and also blissful heaven realms. That, by contrast, is a cycle, a circle, a wheel, a realm of habit, of going round and round the same old stories, the same old actions. You know, you think you're coming up and you're pulled down. It's reactive, it's habitual. This is trying to communicate something else. You notice there's this great big tree ascending and ascending and ascending. And I take that to mean that the Buddha's enlightenment is not an ending. It's a continuous growing and unfolding without any limit. There's, as well as seeing the wheel of life, pratitya samutpada, in the sense of the cycle, there's this other great image from the Buddha's enlightenment where he had doubts about whether people could actually understand what he'd seen. It was so subtle, so profound, so open, inconceivable, so liberated, so blissful. He thought, well, no, they're really not going to get it. And it would be a real drag. And that's not the exact Pali translation, but it would be really tiresome to try and make this known to people, and they just didn't get it. But something happened. He looked again, and he saw people very, very differently. And again, the language is, what he sees is beyond language, beyond words. It said he sees with his Buddha vision, and all he can use is a metaphor. The metaphor is of lotuses, red, white, blue, yellow lotuses growing in a great lake, some tight buds stuck in the mud, others pushing up, pushing towards the light. In other words, he saw that no, there is potential in each and every living being. There is the possibility that they can unfold and move in the direction of enlightenment itself. And then he decided to teach. Then he decided to communicate. Because if you like what he saw, if you like his full unfoldment in enlightenment resonated with, vibrated with, shook with the emerging potential in living beings. So that was his vision. Of course, then he had to unfold that by actually going and talking to people. And that wasn't entirely straightforward. The first person he met, and, you know, he told him he was a Buddha. And he said, oh, yeah, maybe. And he walks out of Buddhist literature, never to return. And I think, again, it's a great teaching because it shows you that the Buddha is not a savior. By you must the zealous effort be made. The Buddhas only show the way. So it's very, very important when we talk about vowing to save beings. We're not talking about being saviors, which is an enormous relief. If you're a committed Buddhist, you don't have to save anybody. You can't save anybody. That's not possible. You can't do that. But what you can do, and what Buddhists need to be devoted to, following on from the inspiration of the Buddha and his disciples, following on from the inspiration of the Bodhisattvas, is to create the conditions whereby people can follow the way, whereby they can make that zealous effort, that intense effort. This is really important because we know very, very well that we're very, very strongly affected by conditions, aren't we? You know, when we look back at our lives, when we look at perhaps our, you know, childhood conditioning, our social conditioning, maybe now the conditioning that goes on, the conditions of work or studies, whatever it might be. There we are, we've taken up a bit of Buddhist practice to some extent. We're trying to do a bit of meditation, we're trying to act virtuously. We have a sense that there's more to become. We have a feeling that we don't want to be defined in the way we've been defined. We have a calling to live a life of liberation, and it's really hard. It's really hard, not just because of our own conditioning that we're dealing with, it's also perhaps because of the world around us. It's just really, really difficult. You know, I listen at Padmavajra, we have a lot of life stories. So I get to hear about people's lives before how they encountered Buddhism. We kind of do it thematically. Sometimes people tell their life story from the point of view of friendships in their life, sometimes from the point of view of ethics in their life. We all do it. I do it. You know, I've told that story so many times. It's always illuminating to kind of plot your life in that way. And what I'm struck by is, you know, how many people have really, really had a difficult life, a really difficult start sometimes, and a difficult middle, really tough. And you think, crikey, how are you still, why are you here? How are you here? How did you make it? So difficult. I mean, I had a good start. I had a really good start. I had very, very loving parents, not saints or anything like that. I don't think anybody's parents are saints, or maybe they are, but very loving, very family orientated people. But, you know, listening to some people's stories, I think, goodness me, how have you got here? How have you survived? And of course, the huge difference in their, and in some ways, the suffering, of course, made them question their life, made them question what they were doing, made them think, well, hang on, I need to live a bit differently. I need to take hold of my life now. I can't just be driven by this stuff. And of course, they came along to Buddhist classes. Yes, the teaching was really helpful. The meditation was really helpful. But time and time again, they said it was the atmosphere in the center. It was the friendliness. Not always. You know, some of them even tell stories, well, I really wasn't that impressed by the order members in the center. You know, I like Buddhism, you know, but, you know, they were a bit unfriendly. You know, and I thought, crikey, it's a miracle that you're here then, isn't it? But, you know, so it's not always the case. You know, maybe when they first came along, the order members were having an off day. Can happen. But the point is, we do need really good conditions to support our efforts to change our minds, to change our lives. We really need those conditions so much, particularly from people. particularly friendship, particularly encouragement, particularly clarification, exemplification. In other words, we need a spiritual community. And one of the sort of features of our spiritual community and of our teacher, of Sangha, he is very, very inspired by the Bodhisattva ideal. He took Bodhisattva vows himself from one of his teachers, Dada Rinpoche, who I had the privilege of meeting many years ago, and we have his relics in a stupa, a Buddhist memorial structure at Padmavajra. We circumambulate that almost every day, every evening, reminding ourselves of the Bodhisattva path. But one of the things Sangha has nobody else, I think, before him has done this. He said, well, and it goes back to that verse I recited, so may I become that which maintains all beings. And my reflection was, I can't do that alone. I've got to arrive at an entirely different consciousness that transcends self and other, that transcends that in order to do that work, opening up to something quite different. So he has a vision of the Sangha itself, vowing to save all beings, if you like, being the Bodhisattva, reaching out to so many different kinds of people, connecting with so many different kinds of people, and helping to support them in the activity of, yes, of individual development, but actually in a development that even in the end will transcend individuality. There's this very, very mysterious different order of consciousness. Sangha has called it a third order of consciousness. Okay, you have an individual, you have somebody who is really taking responsibility for their lives and growing along the path. Then you have individuals in communication, you have a spiritual community, you have people supporting one another in their spiritual practice, in their Dharma life, really encouraging and helping one another. But then what happens when those individuals start to break down the difference between each other? They're still themselves, uniquely, wonderfully themselves, becoming, in a sense, more themselves because of their individual development. But they're, if you like, becoming transparent to one another, luminous to one another. You get this very mysterious, different kind of consciousness. He said the only word he could find that came closer to it was from the Russian Orthodox tradition, Sobornost, or the Greek Orthodox tradition. No, it's Russian, isn't it? Sobornost. Very hard to translate, a kind of consciousness that is entirely uniquely individual and yet flowing into one another. This is really what the Bodhisattva is. We like to, what we're trying to do in our spiritual community is to open up to that consciousness, which is a loving consciousness, a wise consciousness, working together harmoniously for the benefit of all. So I want to look about how we might do that, how we might do that for one another, how we might do that for the world around us. And I'm going to use traditional teaching, which some of you will be very familiar with, but it doesn't matter to go over it again. It's called the Sangraha Vastus. Sangraha Vastus. Sometimes it's translated as the elements of conversion, but that's not really what it means. It means more like the unification of the community, the four means of unifying a community, of bringing people together. And it comes again in this Bodhisattva tradition. It's said that Bodhisattvas, one of the things they do as the expression of their vow to liberate others, is they practice a particular behavior. I'm going to use a fancy Sanskrit compound now, the Parigrahagana Shila, the Parigrahagana Shila. the behavior, the activity, the ethics even of gathering a community to work together for the benefit of the world, to come together to create community, which is attractive, which exemplifies harmonious community, which exemplifies individual development for one another, and which is also reaching out. You know, because I don't know about you, but one of the things that's very, very attractive to people is when they see people genuinely loving each other, not in a cloying, sentimental way, but where they're distinct in themselves and they're harmonious. And they obviously delight in one another. It's very, very attractive. I remember once traveling down to London on the train after a really good retreat. There was a group of us around a table, about, 4 or 5 of us or something like that. And we were just in an animated conversation, really enjoying one another. And people opposite us on the other side of the aisle, they were obviously fascinated. And who are these? Who are these guys? You could see them trying to kind of get the labels. Are they gay? Are they football supporters? Or you could sort of see it. And eventually they said, almost like, "What are you?" or "Who are you?" We said, "Oh, we're Buddhists. We've just been on retreat." We knew it. We knew there was something. We knew there was something about you. And I think it's just because, we just had a lot of love for each other, and yet we're so distinctly ourselves. I've come across that many times, many times. And it's just ordinary, it's human. It's another thing, it's not spiritual in that sort of airy, fairy almost way. It's very, very human. I think another thing, a point I want to make, apropos of nothing, about this thing of what the Dharma gives to the world. I would say the Dharma enables people to be fully human. Fully human. We meet on the level of the deeply human when you're practicing Buddhism. There's nothing, in a way, religious about what we're doing. It's the deeply human, beyond any ideology label, anything like that. And I personally believe that right now, the deeply human and meeting on the deeply human level is needed more than ever before in this age of terrible ideologies and terribly destructive ideologies that seem to possess us. So let's just go through these 4 ways in which communities are unified. And again, you'll see it's very, very human. I'm sure a non-Buddhist could take this, if you were working in, I don't know, in other spheres, in your workplace, or I don't know, if you're doing community work or something like that. I think these are really, really good things. They might even be pre-Buddhist. There might be things that the Buddha picked up that were around in the society. It's quite possible, on which he gave a particular twist to. So the first one is generosity. The generosity. Very, very simple. Generosity. If you really, really want to come together with one another, you need to be generous to one another. Sangha, in describing this, described it as the spiritual community should be characterized by the constant exchange of presents, constant exchange of gifts. And he said the giving is because you're delighted in one another's human emergence. You take delight in that in one another, and you just want to give. And of course, giving can take many, many forms. I came into the centre this evening, and Adele and Jeremy and Sadaraja and Jeanette, they were doing all the tech stuff. It's all voluntary. It's all giving. It's all because they love being in the centre. Other people coming on the class team organising, Eileen and Vinay on the door, and somebody's getting the tea and everything like that. Now, it might, and everything was beautifully set up, incredibly clean. Somebody's cleaned this centre. I presume you don't pay cleaners and so on. It's all voluntary, and this centre's, come out of itself, has come out of generosity. The giving from Windhorse, I presume, Windhorse Trading, which K2 Raja ran for many years. It's all generosity. It's all generosity. This is all an embodiment of generosity. And it can only keep going through that, through generosity, through giving to one another. And of course, we give when we just meet one another, when we're just a human presence to one another. It's one of the greatest gifts, isn't it? When you sit with somebody and they really take you in. They really show interest in you. They listen to you. They want to know what's going on in your life, in all areas of your life, not in a prying way, but because they're interested, because you're a human being. And as a human being, you're interesting. As a human being, you have that potential for growth, which is the essence of being a human being, really. So generosity is so important. It really is the glue that holds us together. And of course, it must go out. It can't just stay inside. But we can't at a Buddhist centre because you're inviting people in. So you've got to sort of go out when people come in. You've got to sort of reach out to connect with them. So generosity must go on and on and on and on. It's Sangha in a lecture talking about the difference between different kind of images of generosity. He said he remembered a kind of a campaign. This is back in the 1970s or 60s for generosity, and it was a campaign to raise funds for a Christian charity, I think, and a very stern image was on the poster saying "Give until it hurts." And he said, well, the Buddhist response to that, it's not really like that. It's give until you swoon with bliss, because generosity, it's not forced. It's voluntary. It's coming out of your delighted response to others. If you are giving until it hurts, you'll probably start resenting who you're giving to. And then that means it's not giving. It's got to become, in the end, egoless, selfless. You're not patting yourself back all the time. You're giving because you're breaking down the difference between self and other. In fact, you've started. That's already happening. But the next of the Sangha of Vastis, I love this one, is Priya Vadita. Priya Vadita. Vadita is speech, communication. Priya is love. It's a beautiful word in Sanskrit, even in modern Indian languages. It's often a girl's name, Priya. And it's an intense love, intense affection. The Buddha used to say to his disciples, you should look at one another with Priya, the Priya Chakshu, the eye of love, the eye of affection. Again, not a cloying, attached love, but an incredibly sweet, affectionate love, because, again, you're delighting in that person. You're delighting in their potentiality. The potentiality for Buddhahood is beautiful. The potentiality for higher states of consciousness is actually lovely. So when you really see it in others, you can't but love. And your speech will be loving. It will be really, really affectionate. It will rejoice in them genuinely, not flattering, not buttering them up or anything like that. But you see them and you say it. You express your delight in them. You tell them how lovely they are. You rejoice in their qualities. We practice rejoicing. Well, we don't practice, we just do rejoicing in merit at Padmavajra, rejoicing in qualities. Birthdays were a big deal for us at Padmavajra. They're big celebrations, lots of presents for one another. So there's the Dharma bit. And then we go around and we tell the person whose birthday is, we list off their qualities to them. And it's fantastic. And I found it fascinating when it happened to me recently, and people were saying those lovely things, which were all true. But what I found interesting about it was I couldn't take it personally. This was really fascinating. I don't mean I was being falsely modest or embarrassed. I thought, yeah, but that quality came from that person. That quality came from my parents. You mentioned my hospitality. I think that comes from two places. My parents were very hospitable people, and it came from India. I lived in India for many years, and I experienced incredible hospitality in Indian homes, particularly very poor people. I really learned what it meant to receive a guest. So I didn't make up that virtue. I learned that virtue. People communicated that virtue to me. So many of them, I found that really fascinating. Virtue itself, it has a kind of selfless quality. It's well worth reflecting on that. What have I just done for myself? How much has come out of teachers, friends, people who didn't know they were my teachers? How much have I learned from others? The good, so much good has come from others. So anyway, Priyavadita, telling people how important they are to you, how much they mean to you, should be done regularly, not just when they're having a hard time. That's what usually happens, isn't it? Somebody goes through a hard time. Oh, but you're wonderful, really. And then you don't tell them that again until the next time they're having a hard time. No, tell them every day. Just keep telling them. Al-Ghazali, the great Muslim theologian, in his duties of friendship in Islam, he says you should constantly be telling your friend their qualities all the time. Constantly breaking into poetry, breaking into poetry about it. Apparently, this happens a lot in India, where people speak in Urdu cultures. People are always, breaking into poetry about their friends. I don't know how much it's alive these days, but this is what we should be like. Of course, this might be a bit countercultural if you're English, British, perhaps. You don't want to. We get too carried away. But we need to break through that kind of conditioning, and we need to express that, and it draws people together. Okay, I've got 10 minutes to go. Good. The next of the Sangha of Vastus is called Artacharya. Arta city, Artacharya. Arta here means meaningful. Or it can mean the goal, but it means meaningful. And charya is living meaningfully. And this is explained in terms of communicating the Dharma to people. That's what a meaningful life is. That's what a meaningful human life is. Communicating that which leads to the development of others, that gives them the teachings, the tools, teaching meditation, teaching ethics, teaching vision is very, very important. Teaching a vision of the Buddhist vision. There's that great saying in the Bible, I forget which book it is, without vision, the people perish. Wonderful saying, it's so true. The Buddha said a similar thing himself, that people are perishing through not hearing the Dharma. He didn't mean a set of dogmas or doctrines. He didn't mean that. He meant that which leads to liberation, that which leads to unfoldment and development. People are perishing. And it does mean as well that we've got to be a lot more imaginative in how we do that. It's great that we have the centre, great that we do the things in the centre, great that I live in a wonderful retreat centre, but I'm sure there are many, many people out there who are perishing, who would really get the Dharma if we could be more imaginative, bolder, more, more creative in our communication, in our language, in our imagery, in our metaphors, in our stories. So much we could do. I mean, the only limit is ourselves. We limit ourselves. So, maybe that could be a project for you and people involved in the centre. How can we make the Dharma more attuned to different kinds of people? We know the Buddha was like that. The Buddha could communicate with anybody and everybody. It wasn't just for the full-time monks and wanderers, farmers, housewives, queens, kings, prostitutes, robbers, thieves, people, very, very poor people. Like I said, I lived in India, and it was a revelation for me communicating Buddhism in India to Buddhist people, they're generally regarded as Dalits, although a lot of Buddhists they're not quite keen on that sort of language because they feel they've stepped out of that kind of definition. But very, very poor people, very, very poor people. I lived in Bombay for many years, and I used to go with my Indian order member friends, and we'd go to a lot of different slum colonies, and people, very, very working class people, not very well educated, and they really got the Dharma. They knew how to respond to the Dharma. You could communicate very, very directly, in a sense, very simply, not simplistically. You could teach any kind of Buddhism, but it had to be direct and really related to their lives and their circumstances. And I found it incredibly inspirational that people, in the lowest stratas of society, according to India, could really respond to the Dharma in that way. So we need to be much, much more imaginative in the way we communicate the Dharma. And remember, human beings need it. It's not a luxury item. I think that's the trouble in the West. Buddhism is sort of at the luxury end, in a sense. It's like, you go to spas and you do a bit of meditation. That's not what it is. This is about the life of life, the essence of life. That's what the Dharma is for. It's getting to the essence of what we are as human beings. And you start to taste that when you take it up. So living meaningfully is communicating the Dharma, communicating Buddhism widely and to whoever's going to listen. It might even be that you're very new to Buddhism, but people notice in your workplace or in your family. I think, hello, something's going on. They're looking a bit different. They look all calm and mindful, and they're really friendly, and they kind of look at me. What's going on? Well, that's kind of communicating the Dharma directly, which brings me to the final point, which is samanatata, which means exemplification, practicing what you preach. In other words, in other words, being an example to others of living this life. The Sangha must exemplify. It must exemplify Buddhist practice, Buddhist values to the world. I must exemplify, this talk, which may or may not be any good, but it's really no good if I'm not living this, what I'm saying. And of course, there is always a disparity between what one is and, in a way, what one communicates. I always feel that very, very keenly. I've got a strong, vision, imagination, get very excited and enthusiastic about the Dharma, but I'm keenly aware that there's so much of me that lags behind all that. I'm not friendly all the time, am I, Akasha? And all the rest of it. Anyway, but not rehearse my faults. But you can still exemplify. Exemplification is not, you'll be pleased to hear, being perfect all the time. That's not what it is. What you exemplify is the whole process and possibility of growth and transformation. The little changes that you've made, the little developments, the little successes that you've had, they are exemplifying something. Even the acknowledgement of the failings that you've had, the fact that you can acknowledge them, that's exemplifying something. That's exemplifying an honesty. And Sakarachta, again, does this breathtaking thing about this point. Exemplification is not exemplifying a sort of fixed level of attainment. What's exemplified is the whole process of human unfoldment and development. So even the slightest bit of change and transformation actually exemplifies the whole path to Buddhahood, and even to this vision of an entirely transfixed world. That's what it does. That's what it does. You just extrapolate from that movement from being a little less self-centered to being a little bit more selfless. It exemplifies even the vow to save all beings. It really does. So very important here. Celebrate your successes. Don't dwell too much on your failings. You know, really place your awareness on those points of growth. Rejoice in them, and rejoice in them in others. And then perhaps, you know, if we do this with one another in the Sangha, and if we're reaching out to others, well, we really will bring something into this world, this very, very benighted world. You know, there's so much fear, so much anxiety. You know, we've got to, and that's another thing I was going to talk about, actually. And I'll finish with this. There's a verse in a Buddhist text which says that in the same way that the farmer is glad when the monsoon rain comes, you can see it's an Indian text, in the same way, bodhisattvas gladden beings. Bodhisattvas gladden beings. And Sangha actually really goes off on his commentary on this. He said, you gladden. That should be your main duty in life, to gladden others. You know, coming out of your growth and the development of your qualities, you gladden others by showing others how to do that, through communicating with them, through befriending with them. And he said, what a terrible thing it is to make people frightened. And we know that there's a lot going on in this world where we're being made to feel frightened. You know, that's a terrible thing to do. That's a way of controlling people. It's even a way of trying to control yourself. Anxiety is all about control, isn't it, in a way? Gladden. So if you don't remember anything else from this talk, think of gladdening yourselves and gladdening others. And maybe that's the way we can save all beings. Thank you.